Charlie and Katie Parker from Texas, and we're so happy to have you back.
Thanks, Mary. You did a good job with that. Hi, everybody. Can you hear me all right? That needs to go up just a little bit, I think. Okay. All right. We've got a room for 4 volunteers if you want to come sit up on the front row. This room kind of reminds me of the Baptist church I grew up in. You had to get there early to get a seat in the back, you know. Thanks. All right.
There you go.
I'm Charlie Parker. I'm a very grateful recovered alcoholic.
Hey, Charlie.
Been sober by the grace of God and people like y'all in rooms like these since March 22nd of 1985, and I am truly grateful. The bad news is that's 5 months less than my wife, and that's a very important 5 months in our household. She likes to bring it up from time to time. You know, we're just going to start off tonight, kind of talking a little bit about what we're doing here this weekend. Is everybody here for the workshop? Going to be here for the work? Good. Gosh, we're glad to see so many folks here. Just to get an idea, how many people have 5 years or less of sobriety? Just raise your hand for a second. Oh, that's wonderful. These guys are worrying me over here.
They're the usual suspects.
What about between 5 and 10 years? All right. And 10 to 15? 15 to 20? All right. Okay. And over 20 years? Nice. All right. We got a nice mix of folks. We're not sent up here from Texas to straighten out AA. We're a couple of people that have had varying levels of experience. How's that, Glenn? Glenn says, this is good. This is not good. And I want to thank Glenn and Jane for being here taping this thing. I tell you, I can't tell you how much of my experience in learning in AA has come from driving around listening to those CDs. I listen to it all the time. I joke about it sometimes. I got a 12-inch subwoofer in my car in this hot stereo, and I drive around listening to Clancy and Bob Darrell, and why do I need a sub for that? But we're going to talk a little bit tonight. I'm going to tell a little of my story. Katie's going to tell a little of her story, and then tomorrow we're going to take a run through the steps. And we're calling this weekend the root of our problem, because I had my biggest spiritual awakening. Katie and I, our stories are very similar in a lot of ways, in that both of us had significant spiritual awakenings well into sobriety. I had my biggest spiritual awakening at 17 years of sobriety. And then it kind of happened for Katie. And so there's stuff to talk about, but I think for tonight we'll just talk a little bit about who we are and what we're doing and what we hope to do this week. It's funny, we come up, Bonnie started with a joke, and I usually start with a joke. I've been telling this joke for a long time, and some of you have probably heard it before, but it's a good joke, and I like the way I tell it. So in AA we talk about coming out of our own experience. They talk about our stories disclose in a general way what we used to be like, what happened, and what we're like now. But the most important thing is that it come out of my experience, because a drunk can smell a phony story from 1,000 yards away, and if I start talking, if AA ever becomes heady theory for me, I'm in trouble, if, that whole thing about take my advice, I'm not using it, that thing. So, we always talk about coming out of our own experience. It always reminds me of this guy that was driving along one time and he sees a sign in front of this farmhouse. Might have been the same farmhouse Bonnie was talking about. And it says, talking dog for sale. And, he can't stand it. He goes up to the door and he says, you got a talking dog for sale? And the guy says, yeah, I do. He's around back. And he goes around back, and this red hound dog is laying there, and he says, so you can talk? And the dog says, well, I certainly can. He goes, good grief, how did that happen? And he said, well, when I was young, I started picking up the language, and as I got older, I started developing the nuances of the language, and it's developed over time, he says, but it's really turned into an amazing life for me. He said, I've stayed in some of the world's nicest hotels, I've traveled all over the world, I've eaten in some of the nicest restaurants in the world. I had a 19-year career with the Drug Enforcement Administration, and I was able to infiltrate some situations that no human agent would have ever been able to get into. But even more interesting than that is some of my pups have become international diplomats and have picked up foreign languages, and it's just made for a fascinating life for me and my family. And the guy goes, wow, it's been really nice visiting with you. And he says, he goes around front, and the farmer's still sitting there. He goes, how much do you want for a dog like that? And the guy goes, I don't know, $20. And he goes, why would you ever sell a fabulous dog like that for $20? And the farmer thinks for a second. He goes, none of that crap he told you is true. You know. So in AA, it doesn't really matter how good the story is if it's not my experience. So that's what we hope to come out of our experience up here tonight, and we have a lot of fun sober, and we're both very actively involved in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. But it's been varying levels of experience in that, and that's worth talking about this weekend. But we're gonna go through the steps, but the way we're going to do it is it turned out my experience with step one, my understanding of step one now is not what it always was. I see step one differently than I did for a long time. Step three definitely was not what I thought it was. And we're talking about years of hanging out in the rooms of AA. And so the inventory process has taken on a different meaning, and the amends process, and then the disciplines of steps 10, 11, and 12. And we're going to talk about that a lot. I'm just going to tell a little of my story.
Mm-hmm. I think it's a good idea.
Is that what we're doing?
Mm-hmm.
This is Katie, everybody. This is Katie and I.
We have actually spoke about this earlier, but I think he just forgot how we were going to do this. So
I just
he's
came
verifying again.
Yeah,
that's right. Now
that's right. I was going to tell Katie's story tonight, and then she was going to tell mine. No, I'm like you know those border collies that are always looking to their master for instruction, you know, and
he really is,
yeah,
and it's a good thing.
Yeah, that's right. I like to think of myself as some of Katie's best work.
Mm-hmm.
You know, she didn't have much to work with when we started. We were best friends. We were litter mates in sobriety. We both came in. She came in 84, and I came in 85. I came in 83, and in 84, and in 85. And we were in the same group together, and she was married the whole time, and I went through a series of marriages during that time. But her husband, this will come out during the weekend, but her husband eventually got very sick and passed away, and we were a couple for about 6 years, and then we've been married about a year and a half. So it's been very cool. You know, I don't know how much of my story to tell tonight, but I come from Dallas, Texas. I come from a pretty normal family. I mean, whatever that looks like. A friend of mine likes to say normal is a setting on a washing machine, but it was a fairly normal family. I grew up, you know, I was born in 1956. I'm 54 years old, and you know, there wasn't anybody in my house knocking anybody around, or there wasn't any. We were in a Southern Baptist household, and you know, our philosophy is whatever it is, we're against it, but a lot like my home group sometimes, but there wasn't anybody drinking, there wasn't anybody knocking each other around, and I've heard enough fifth steps over the years, you know, to know that a lot of people had it a lot worse than I did growing up. And then I had this sister. There was two kids. My sister's 5.5 years older than me, and she was perfect. I don't know if anybody else had a perfect spouse, but I mean a perfect sibling, but she was a pretty tough act to follow. She was, you know, first chair flute player and National Honor Society and drum majorette and you name it, you know, she was in it. And then there's this thuggish little brother, and I was like the only kid in high academics that was smoking cigarettes in the 5th grade. I remember that. That was my claim to fame. But I grew up under the burden of potential. Did anybody else? A lot of us heard a lot about our potential growing up, and I would always constantly get, if you could just live up to your potential, why can't you be more like the kid across the street, and this and that. And I remember thinking, well, that's kind of you, Mom, but I'm really not holding back that much, But I went along, and I didn't start drinking until I was I think I had my first drink a little earlier, but I didn't really start drinking until I was 16. And that's a funny, like there's a difference between drinking and really drinking. It's like being drunk and drunk. Clint used to say he didn't consider himself drunk if he remembered the arrest. But I didn't start drinking until I was about 16. And I probably didn't need this program till I was about 17. I really, there are very few. I'm a big book guy. I love the big book. All these are leather-bound copies of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous that a friend of mine had leather-bound for me. And it's one of my most valued possessions. But it's just a copy of the big book. It's the first 164 pages of the big book, and I love the book. And it wasn't always that way. So I did a lot of going to meetings and that sort of thing. But, this book doesn't wait long to start making promises to a guy like me. On the title page right here, it says the story of how many thousands of men and women have recovered from alcoholism. So already, when I started studying this book, on the title page, it's saying stuff that differs from what I've been hearing in the discussion meetings I've been sitting in for 15, 17 years. Because it says that it talks about being a recovered alcoholic, and that's throughout the book. I don't like to get in an argument about that, but we will talk about what it is we're talking about having recovered from. I guarantee I have not recovered from the allergic reaction to alcohol, and I hope not to test that theory ever again. But I have recovered from this hopeless condition of mind and body that the book does such a great job of describing. But I love the big book, but there's very few lines in the book that don't apply to me. But there is one that I can think of, and it says, our stories are filled with countless vain attempts to prove that we could drink like normal men. I don't have any experience with that. I started off as a party guy and a get loaded guy. I missed the 60s, but I made the most of the 70s, but there was never a time where I was trying to drink like normal men. I mean, it was always about getting really, really loaded for me. And I don't have countless vain attempts to prove it. In fact, I only stopped drinking about 3 times, and the rest of the time it was on, and something happened for me in drinking. It turns out it doesn't happen for normal people. It doesn't happen for my sister, and that sort of thing. Katie is very diligent about this timer up here, so we're going to split this little hour and 15 minutes tonight. So I just, if you're like me, drinking works really, really well at first. We don't, the book, in the doctor's opinion, it says men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. Any objection on that one? I think it's a little, sometimes it's like it's not even okay to say that we like drinking. I probably still like vodka more than most people that are out there drinking it tonight. But, and if I thought it would do for me tonight what it did for me when I was 17, 18 years old, you'd have a different speaker up here. But because, early on, when it says, now I do think it's a little understated when it says we like the effect produced by alcohol. Because, you can tell it was written by a non-alcoholic. Dr. Silkworth was not one of us. We would have given it a little more oomph, I think, because I like banana pudding, but I was relating when she was talking about that the dog can't handle human food, and I'm like, neither can I, apparently, but you got to hear my diet talk sometime. But
oh, honey, you're tired. Men and women like.
Thank you. I should tell you, I got a little. Katie won't let me call it ADD. She likes to think of it as a manifestation of self-centeredness, but I do have it's kind of ugly sounding, isn't it, when you put it like that? ADD sounds, but I do have some little focus issues, and I tend to go off on little bunny trails, and a lot of times during a talk I'll say, we're going to get back to that later, and we'll get back to that later. And what that means is this is not the right time in the talk to talk about that piece, but when I say we're going to get back to it later, we're probably not coming back. There's about a 10% chance I'm going to cycle back around to it. So I always get really excited when I pull one back up. But it says men and women drink because they like the effect produced by alcohol. The first time I drank, something special happened. Myers is a friend of mine down in Texas, and he likes to say sometimes, we all remember the first drink. How many people in the room remember the first drink of alcohol? Just quick show of hands. All right. Do you remember the first time you ate green beans? No, because something special happened when I drank alcohol the first time. It treated something that I didn't even know was in there. And it, I just remember thinking early on, we're going to do this a whole lot, and I can tell you, short version of my story, I am big on singleness of purpose. I am about AA is about alcoholics working with alcoholics, and you won't ever. I try very hard not to talk about outside issues in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. You'll never hear me or any of my sponsors say I'm an alcoholic and anything, and we may or may not get a chance to talk about it, but on page 18, let's talk about it right now. On page 18 in the book, it says, it talks about how we will lie to a psychiatrist and a doctor and that sort of thing, but it says, but the ex-problem drinker, who is properly armed with the facts about himself, can generally win the entire confidence of another alcoholic in a few hours. Here's the key line in that paragraph, though, and this is one of those squiggly writing paragraphs, the ones we're supposed to really pay attention to. Down at the bottom it says, until such an understanding is reached, little or nothing can be accomplished. Well, if little or nothing can be accomplished until there's that understanding that takes place between one alcoholic and another one, it makes it sound like it's pretty important, doesn't it? It's important enough that out of all the 12-step programs that are out there, and there's, NA and AA and CA and GA and OA and Gamblers Anonymous and Overeaters Anonymous, and I even heard there's a lip balm addicts anonymous out there in case any of you have ever suffered from that heartbreaking malady, but there she goes. I feel you. But out of all the 12-step programs that are out there, the only difference between any of them is the first half of the first step and the middle part of the 12-step, which is what I'm powerless over and who I carry the message to, because that identification is so important. If that important, otherwise we'd all just meet in one room, and I don't think that's really a good idea. I don't have time to go. Maybe tomorrow I'll go into the story about the caffeine lady, but I do have a lot of experience with outside issues and that sort of thing, but there's something that happens when one alcoholic talks to another one. And, the AA was the first place I'd ever been around people that drank like I did that had quit and seemed happy about it. The only people I'd ever been around that had quit drinking were not happy about it. And, we'll get into a lot of this tomorrow, maybe. But, as far as what we're doing tonight, or this weekend, tomorrow's the 1 year anniversary of the death of Mark Houston, and Mark Houston was my sponsor, and I loved him. Something big happened when we met this guy, and this was a guy that was involved in a level of this work that I had never experienced. And it was funny because looking back, this is a looking back program, and I don't always see the hand of God in the present moment or in what's going on today. But when on page 100, and it's funny, I used to close talks, regular 1 hour talks, with this paragraph because I thought it sounded really cool and it kind of fit, but there's a piece of it that I didn't see for years, and I'm up there reading it from the podium. It says, both you and the new man must walk day by day in the path of spiritual progress. If we persist, remarkable things will happen. When we look back, we realize that the things which came to us when we put ourselves in God's hands were better than anything we could have planned. Follow the dictates of a higher power, and you'll presently live in a new and wonderful world, no matter what your present circumstances. It's a great way to end a talk, but I didn't hear for a long time that line where it says, when we look back, we see that the things which happened to us when we placed ourselves in God's hands were better than anything we could have planned. Looking back, I can see the hand of God in stuff that happened, and one of it happened in us showing up at a workshop like this. I mean, Katie and I had gone through a flat period at AA where that's putting some varnish on it, calling it a flat period. I'd kind of drifted away, and some mild dishonesty had drifted into my life. Just some little occasional wire fraud and dishonest marriage and a few things like that. But we wandered into this Big Book weekend, and it's funny because we just found the tapes, the CDs of that conference, and we were looking at it. I should warn you, I'm a big guy, I ride Harleys, I like the Dallas Cowboys, all that stuff, but I'm liable to cry like a little girl in a pink dress up here, especially when I see the hand of God moving in my lives and the lives of others, when it's just so clearly there. Well, after this workshop, one time Mark was sitting there with Katie, and he goes, do you really think you had anything to do with being at that workshop? And looking back on it, there's a lot of us here tonight that probably think we had something to do with showing up at a workshop like this. I can tell you it's not that way. We get moved into places where we're supposed to be, and it's not until it could be years later when I look back and say, my God, look at how I was just channeled along, to meet this person and this person, and but I don't always see it on the front end. And we had gotten back into being real active in AA and sponsoring guys and stuff, and this friend of mine had sobered up, and he met this one-eyed guy from down in Texas that a lot of people have heard speak, Chris R. And then I started listening to him. I started listening to all this stuff, and a random guy in the home group, and this guy is, just a meeting makers make it type of AA guy, but one day he goes, I heard about a Big Book study up in Dallas, and I said, well, I know some guys in Dallas. We're in Austin now. We live in Austin. Been in Austin for 30 years. So this guy sends a flyer, and we look at it, and it says, Big Book Weekend, Mark H. and Dave F. And I told Katie, I said, I don't think this is the deal Mark's looking for. That Dick is looking for. But it might be something we might be interested in. This Mark guy, I think, sponsors Chris. And I like Chris. I like listening to Chris. So what the hell? Well, am I the only one in the room that there's been times where if you just said, let's go to a Big Book weekend, I would have been like, the whole weekend. You're going to read the Big Book, for the whole weekend? I don't even like Big Book meetings, because I don't get to share about me as much, So the idea that we would go to a Big Book weekend was a mind blower, and we got up there, and there he is, and I tell you, it was the experience we had and the things that we heard have lit up a trail for us that I would have never seen coming. And that's what we like to talk about, and that's what that's the experience we're going to talk about in the rest of the weekend, is this new experience with the steps, because I had a long period with the steps that were different from what we're doing now. And there was a time when if a new guy had come up to me, I would have done a lot of slogan slinging. And, I'm not ashamed to say anymore that there was a time when if a new guy had come up to me, I wouldn't have really had a whole lot to offer him, other than just go to a lot of meetings and put the plug in the jug, right? I've heard that one, and, don't drink no matter what. But, that's not what we're bringing these days. And but I remember, some of the stuff we talked about was that, just because my mind tells me that I believe in God doesn't mean that it's so. And we're going to talk some this weekend about current agnosticism and what that looks like in sobriety. We'll talk about that in steps 2 and 3. Does the level of fear that I experience in my life today indicate that I really have faith in this power? Or are there times when I take my will back and I think I better handle this one because this one's kind of important? And there's a lot of stuff like that, and because the 12 and 12 talks about we can have faith in God and still keep Him blocked out of our lives. And the way that shows up for me is I'm going, oh yeah, God's awesome. Yeah, God, He took away my drinking problem and this and that. Now I don't need Him. I don't need Him for this deal here. I got this one. I don't really need Him for my taxes, and I don't really need Him for my money, and I don't need Him for this deal with Katie, or my kids. But if I ever run up against a really big problem, I'm bringing God right in. And can you hear the level of self-will that has crept back into that equation? We're going to talk a lot about that kind of stuff this weekend. Our home group is a primary purpose group in Austin, Texas. We study the Big Book line by line, word by word, week after week, and it's one of the most vibrant. It's the biggest weekly meeting in Austin. It's a lot more exciting than it sounds like it would be. Some of my old homeboys are like, "So you're going to read the Big Book the whole meeting?" You're like, "Yeah." You're going to, well, what about next week? Well, we're going to turn the page and, and they're like, oh boy, but we meet on Tuesday nights, we run about 150, 175 people, on a Tuesday night in there, and it's powerful. And, people are coming out of there with real solution. And I think the AA community is hungry for real solution. I think, and there are pockets of enthusiasm. We're lucky enough to get to move around a little bit, and there are pockets of enthusiasm all over the country and all over the world. That I really think that AA is making a big comeback in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. If you sobered up in the last 25 or 30 years, you sobered up during a period of time when the bulk of meetings are open discussion meetings, and you hear what you hear. And now I got to keep in mind, I have a terrible habit of judging people really harshly for not knowing something that I learned about 30 minutes ago. I'm sure that doesn't happen with you guys up here, but it's like, once I learn something new, and I may have had this other belief for 15 years, but once I learn what the book really says, I'm like, how can you not know that? This meeting is junk, so I got to watch that. We're going to move around a lot this weekend. We're real excited to be here. To be at the Wilson House is a very exciting thing. The idea that Bill was born, Vermont had a big role in Alcoholics Anonymous. Bob was born here, Bill was born here, Ebby Thatcher was born here. And that's some pretty key figures in our program. But, to be here in this thing, it's just a real honor. And our buddy Chris S. is coming up tomorrow, I think. And, he's the one that originally got us hooked up doing workshops. But I got to tell you one funny story about the Wilson House. Some of you know that in the living room they've got this lamp it shines over where Bill was born. And they call it the perpetual lamp, I think. It burns Have y'all seen it? Burns 24/7, 365. And this Chris comes up here, and I'm not going to say the guy's name. Well, his name was Tom, but he brings this guy Tom up here for a workshop weekend one time, and they're up here, and the perpetual lamp's up there in the living room. Well, Bonnie walks through in the living room one day, and she goes, "The lamp is off," and they go over there, and Tom has unplugged it to charge his cell phone, and there's something really funny about that, but I mean, and there's a part of me that thinks Bill would think that's funny too, because I think at some level Bill would be going, "Oh, the perpetual lamp, for Pete's sake," next it's going to be the coffee pot, and we're going to be putting the ashes off his cigarette butts on our, but we have deep respect for the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm a big AA history lover. And some of the things we're going to do this weekend, we've got a 1936 Webster's Dictionary up here. Sometimes it's very interesting to look up what a word means, or especially what it meant at the time they were writing the Big Book, because some of these words don't mean what I think they mean. We work a lot with a thing called the set-aside prayer. That was written in my sponsorship lineage, but it's basically a prayer that says, "God, please help me set aside everything I think I know about the Big Book, the fellowship, the steps, even you, God, so that I could have a new experience. Please help me see the truth." Because if you're like me, sometimes, and especially when I've been banging around these rooms for a few years, sometimes what I think I know can stand in the way of the truth. Where you're trying to talk to me about the Big Book, and I'm going, oh yeah. Or I'll even be reading the book, and I'm going, oh yeah. See, you can't tell me anything about this paragraph. I've already got it underlined and highlighted, but in doing the set-aside prayer, it frees my mind and my ego up enough to where I have a chance of some new information coming in, because for a lot of my sobriety, I would read this book and I would see stuff in here, and I don't know what would happen in my mind. It would just go right over my head. And I think what happens is I like to read stuff and look for things that I agree with. I like to read stuff and find ways that I'm already right, and if it doesn't agree with what I already believe, I just don't even really give it much away. And then until I come to something that agrees with what I think, and they go, there it is. And turns out I missed a lot. Mark used to say, "How do you know what you don't know?" And we work with that a lot. How do we know what we don't know? None of us were, I wasn't ever trying to, bail out on AA or work a half-assed program, but I was missing a lot. I missed a lot in my early understanding. So the Big Book, and it's funny, the first time we did a workshop, they said, I was scared to death, I told Katie, I was like, my God, I just got used to the idea of giving a 1-hour talk, and then, anybody else get nervous of giving a 1-hour talk, and now they're talking about, I'm like, what are we going to talk about Friday night, all day Saturday, and Sunday morning? And Chris made out a little schedule for us, step 1, 9 to 10, and I remember the first thing, when I looked at the schedule, Katie showed me the schedule, and I looked it over and I went, oh, I'm going to need more time, So we won't have any shortage of stuff to talk about. We're going to be moving tomorrow. We're going to start off with step 1 in the early session tomorrow. It's fun to watch me and Katie fight over the microphone, because we're far from a lack of, sometimes we have, just like when I used to be doing some of those outside issues, there's a little problem with the split sometimes. I like to get the heavy half of the hour and 15 minutes sometime, but if we're not having some fun this weekend, we're screwing the deal up. I don't think studying the Big Book or working the steps or trying to get a new experience of it has to be dull and boring, because this is fun stuff. We're talking about facing and being rid of the stuff that's blocking me from the power that's the only shot for a guy like me. We're moving. It kills me when you're sitting in a meeting and they go, some guy says, "Oh, I'm working a 4th step right now," and everybody goes, like, oh, bless your heart. You're just going to free yourself to be with this power. That's really awful. You should, but it's not that big a deal. It's a simple process, but I tell you, I've picked up a lot of new information and had a lot of new experience in it. There's some guys here. I'm glad, I met Dane here just a year ago, and JJ, and some of you folks we've met before, and some of you we don't know, but we've had some powerful experiences in this work, and I know Katie thinks she's about to get the microphone, but I've got 14 seconds to burn here. With that, I really hope we have some fun this weekend. I hope we get some new experience with the steps, and I'm just dying to hear what Katie's going to say. So I'm going to turn it over to her. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Hi, y'all. I'm Katie Parker. I am an alcoholic.
Hi, Katie.
I've had the gift of sobriety since October the 28th of 1984. That is 5.5 months more than Charlie. And, it's funny. People go, boy, your ego really comes out in that. And I said, well, everybody's does when it comes to time. You know what I mean? If you really want to be honest, you ask somebody, how much time do you have? And if you got more, you're like, right? But it's funny in our house sometimes when when I'll tease Charlie and I'll go, well, honey, it'll make a little bit more sense in about 5.5 months. Just hang in there with it. You'll see a lot of playing. We play a lot. Charlie and I's relationship is not your normal relationship. Let me start out by saying that. I was married for 20 years to Joe Gordon. And I had 10 minutes sober. He had 6 years sober. So, thank God the book says we can't be the arbiter of anyone's sex life, because if anybody had stepped in, there's no telling what could have happened. And we managed to make this deal work for 20 years, and unfortunately he got very sick. And Charlie was my best friend. We'd met him in these rooms, but he and I gravitated together like brother and sister. I mean, Lenny and Squiggy. Laverne and Shirley, for you guys that are younger, Beavis and Butthead,
Come on.
Yeah, oh, yes. And so we had this great relationship, like brother and sister, just teased each other and just had a ball. I'd go help him build fences, and it was really cool. I absolutely love sobriety. I love Alcoholics Anonymous. I love the fellowship. I loved everything about it the day I walked in these rooms. And, when Joe got sick, and as my story will tell you, I was in untreated alcoholism. And what ended up happening is I gravitated towards Charlie and scared him to death. And I'm telling you, it was not on my radar. It was not in my thinking. But the untreated alcoholism I was dealing with, the bedevilments on page 52, they're painful. They're very painful. And they're not light depression. They're insanity. Stark raving sober is what I call it. And I am so grateful that when I, made a move on my best friend and risked a 20-year best friendship. You all know what I'm talking about, right? We don't need any details. It was, he was quick enough to say, whoa, Katie. And then, I was humiliated. I'm storming out the door, and he's like, 14 seconds later going, whoa, hold up now. Come on back. Wait.
Not 14 seconds.
Okay, it was 18 seconds. But the truth is through a loving God and a lot of work, we managed to make this deal work. And people, I love it. People always say, it's great to fall in love with your best friend. Well, it's damn hard, too. You got a lot of history there, and it was a lot of rough roads. And, I'd been married all the time, and he had 3 marriages, and I didn't really care for any of them. And, I was his best friend. I told him that. And, but the good thing was our children blended well together. My kids called Charlie Uncle Charlie. So when my oldest had our first grandbaby, she's like, so what's it, Grandpa Uncle Charlie? I mean, kind of sounded a little deep south there, And, but it's really been wonderful. And the best part, though, is this story about Mark. It's amazing, guys. I mean, when Charlie said, let's go to this big book study, I'm knee deep in untreated alcoholism. I'm digging a sick open discussion meeting. Do you know what that looks like? That's the one where all we're doing is complaining. And I loved it. And I was the queen of, let's talk about who we don't like. Come on. And you could have named the meeting always in collision with somebody or something. We didn't have a group conscience because we weren't going to do by the traditions. And, when you're really in some deep untreated alcoholism, you got to find a pretty sick group. And and now, once again, I'm not aware I'm doing any of this. This is all looking back. Once I was awakened to what was going on, it was pretty unbelievable. And when Charlie found Mark, and he said, let's do this big book weekend, I remembered walking in there, and Mark was up there, and I was thinking, who is this guy? And on the way up there, we listened to Chris R., and I don't know if you've ever heard him, but Chris I think you either like him or you don't. It's unfortunate, but you either like him or you don't. And I've grown to love Chris, but let me tell you, the first time I heard his CD, I kept hitting that button off. I go, who is this guy? How dare he say? And Charlie goes, good God, can we just listen to the man? I'm like, whatever. Flipping back on for another 15 seconds, and I'm turning him back off again. I've been sober 15 years, and I've got a lot of ego rebuilt back up, right? So we end up hearing Mark, and I remembered I pulled Mark aside to ask him a question because I kept trying to leave. I tried to leave 3 times, and we're on some church property down a Caliche Road, and it's raining. And Charlie goes, "Where are you going to go?" And I'm like, "I'm leaving. I don't have a car." And I'm going to take my roller bag down that Caliche Road. Any of y'all relate to this insanity? But I'm leaving. No one is stopping me. I got nowhere to go, no way to get out of here, but I'm leaving. And Mark and I were talking, and Mark had that belly laugh. And he would I'd tell him something, he'd go, oh. And I think, you suck too. I remember, I was just so angry. Oh, so angry. And, but what ended up happening is that weekend was the beginning of the fire that lit. Charlie's fire lit way brighter than mine did. Mine was very slow burning. I have a tremendous ego. I am hard-headed and stubborn as can be. And I think most of us really are. It's just how it manifests in you, right? I mean, alcoholics, extreme example of self-will run riot, though we usually don't think so. And so, but one of the things is that it was a slow burn for me, but I thought, you know what? These boys do know something. Something's going on. And I remembered going back to that sick meeting that I was a strong member of. I am not knocking that meeting. Don't get me wrong. I was a solid member of that meeting. And I could not believe that I did not hear one word about alcoholism spoken. It was all about, who we didn't like or what was going. It was just a kind of constant bitching meeting. If you can have it that way. And so I called Charlie. I said, my God, that little punk on that CD was right. And I can't believe that this is happening. And I mean, I was awakened like that. Now, the road was a slow road for me because I'm so stubborn and hard-headed. But the journey that Charlie and I went on in starting this big book study, and I love the tapers. Besides the fact I do love Jane and Glenn very much, but I love the tapers. Had it not been for those CDs that I could just pop them in and listen to them over and over and rewind them and get my book out and restudy it. And Bob D. I'm a big fan of Bob Darrell's out of Las Vegas, and I love Mark Houston, and I just studied and studied and studied and studied. And then I began having this experience based on what they were saying. I found a female sponsor. I do like girls with girls and boys with boys. That's my own opinion. And she was coming out of untreated alcoholism, and she happened to be a big brain, so I was very fortunate because when she studied it, she kind of got it and was able to really explain it to me. And so together we came out of untreated alcoholism, and she lives between 60 to 63, which is the topic of our weekend, the root of our problems. And but what ended up happening is today, some 7 years later, I sponsor about 30 women. We do the Big Book weekend. We've been asked to study the Big Book around the world. We've been very fortunate because we believe, and this is just Charlie and I's experience, that there's a lot of people sitting in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous that are unaware that there's more to be offered. They know that what they got is just okay. It's okay. But they're not on fire. And what I found, and I tell you what, I could have left this lifetime and thought I had done the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And what I learned was I had done maybe a tenth of what the 12 steps had to offer. The God of my understanding today is, there's just no comparison. I mean, God has my back like I never believed. I mean, I'd be hard pressed to believe you could come at me with anything that wouldn't certainly be painful. Don't get me wrong, but I would know that God has my back. And just briefly, a little bit about my story. I was sick last week. You have to forgive me. My throat is very dry, and I'm such an alcoholic. I have a doctor friend that called me in a Z-Pak, Tamiflu. I took Alka-Seltzer. I took Zyrtec. And one other thing until I was dizzy. But I thought, we're going to dry this damn thing up before I get to the Wilson house. Charlie goes, honey, that is too much. I'm like, I don't care.
She basically just raked the medicine cabinet into her mouth.
I will be in bed for 2 days, and I'm going to be well. Because I just think this place is magical, man. I mean, it is magical. And the last time I was here, I had the most unbelievable awakening to self. I may or may not tell that story, but let me tell you about me as a kid. I'm 53 years old. I got sober when I was 26. I'm proud to be 53 years old. I love getting old. Imagine that. The whole world seems that getting old's a bad thing. I think it's a privilege. And, I think you can look at it two ways. It either sucks or it's great. I think I'll take great. And so...
It's coming.
It's coming, yeah. I know a secret. You're getting older. But when I was third born, and I was born in the 50s. And so, the 50s were a different time. There were 3 channels on the TV. And, you basically went out and rode your bike when the news came on. You had Leave It to Beaver and Father Knows Best, and your mind was, those images. And I remembered at a young, my dad was an ex-professional football player. He was also a mechanical engineer for Union Carbide after he'd gotten out of playing ball. And alcohol was fun at our house. There was never any beatings, never any falling down drunks and fights. It was always fun. And so I grew up with the concept that alcohol was great. And I remembered at about, I must have been around 8 years old, hyperventilating. I don't know if any of y'all got into hyperventilating, but there's usually a handful of people in the room that did. And there is a high in hyperventilating that, this is long before I ever took a drink. And we'd take that towel and we'd wrap it up and you'd strangle each other, for God's sakes. But if you think about it, when we were kids in the 50s, we were riding a bicycle with no seat, pumping somebody on the handlebars. You know what I mean? All you had was that pipe coming up between your legs. Downhill. There was none of all this, panic-stricken parents and the helmet and the, wrist guards. And so my sister and I and my brother and the neighbor kids, man, we just would hyperventilate. And when you'd come out of that, completely knocked out, fainted stage, there was a feeling at that moment that I just loved. I dug it. Now, not every kid dug it. There were kids running out of that room with their hair on fire. You know what I mean? And I swear it could just be almost a test for alcoholism right then and there. The ones that wanted to do it again probably were alcoholic. The ones that ran out of the room, Al-Anons. You know what I mean? You could have just figured it out right there. But, and then the other thing, and once again, this is looking back, it would never have occurred to me had we just not all sat around, as alcoholics do, talking about their childhood or their life or their drinking or whatever. I loved Vicks Formula 44, the black licorice Vicks Formula 44, and I was a pretty sick kid, so I drank a lot of that. It's got as much alcohol as NyQuil. I looked it up. They don't even have it on the counters anymore. But I'm tooling along, and my mom's a stay-at-home mom, and I remembered my mother was a beautiful woman, absolutely beautiful. I remembered she was educated, and my dad had, he was just the party guy, and both my parents were single children, so we had no aunts, no uncles, no cousins. Now, that's not unusual to me at all, until I get older and I start realizing that a lot of you people, man, you got tons of, I don't even really know what a cousin is, you know what I mean? And so my mother gets sick, and back then you weren't allowed in the hospitals when you were a child. You all remember that? You know, it's funny that the kids that are 30 and under have no idea that we weren't even allowed in the hospital. And so my dad says, you know, your mother's sick. It's just overnight, it felt like. We need to go to the hospital. We go in there, and she's a small woman, and she's laying in the bed. And I remember thinking, this is not good. You know, there's machines, and she's hooked up to all this stuff, and just didn't look good at all. And my brother's 4 years older than me. My sister's 2 years older than me. And I just remembered I wanted out of there. I didn't want to be in there. It was uncomfortable. Get me out of here. That people are talking about us in the hallway. You know, of course, they all knew if they saw kids in there, it was not good. And so the next day, my dad comes in and wakes us up and says, you know, your mother died last night, and she died of a kidney disease that had been going on for some time. But it was 1966, and you just didn't talk about that stuff back then. And so my dad said, we're going to make it through this. And I'm telling you what, he was such an entertainer. He had music piped through the house. We had Herb Albert and the Tijuana Brass. You know, we had Engelbert Humperdinck. And, you know, Dad would slide in playing the guitar. It was going to be fun. And that's all I remembered. And in 6 weeks, he had remarried. And that's pretty quick. That's pretty quick. I swear, my dad was a player. Now, that kind of grosses me out to think about that. But I believe my father was a player because the story gets better. So he was married for 6 weeks, and this woman comes in. She's got 2 small kids, one younger than me. That's a problem. You know, I remembered standing there by a swimming pool that had no water in it, and the little girl's looking in, and I thought, I'm shoving her in. You know, probably 12 feet. Hit her head on the concrete. That's the way my mind thinks. We'll just get rid of you. You know what I mean? You are a problem, gone. And the woman was there for a weekend, maybe a week, I can't remember, and gone. It was done. Her husband had been killed in the Vietnam War. I found out later as an adult. But she was gone. And within 3 months, my dad remarried again. And she lasted about 3 months. She was beautiful. She was on the cover of Life magazine. He always had these beautiful women. And I always remembered that as a kid, thinking, these are beautiful women. And I'd always say, do we get to call this one Mom? You know, do we get to call this one Mom? What's the deal? And then she was gone. And then he married another one. And so within 18 months, we had 3 moms and 6 live-in housekeepers. Now, if you'd have told me when I came into Alcoholics Anonymous, that's why I was alcoholic. I'd have staked my life on that. That's how much I misunderstood the disease of alcoholism. I thought that's why I was alcoholic. I had no idea that all that did was influence my old ideas. See, I got plenty of old ideas about men and women and marriage and children, how they're raised, because that's going to come up in my inventory. Because the way we were raised is affecting, it's our old ideas. We have to let go of them absolutely, right? Well, I have old ideas when I drank. I have moral and philosophical convictions galore. Can't live up to them. I can't live up to them sober. Can't live up to them drunk. So that's what made me begin to understand that my alcoholism started long before I took the drink. I am absolutely driven. When the book says selfishness and self-centeredness, that we think is the root of our troubles, driven by 100 forms of fear, that self-centered fear will make me, I will die to prove a point to you. That's how crazy I can get. You know what? And if you dared me as a kid, I'd risk my own life just to prove I could do it. I remember they threw I swear it just had to be stupid dads came up with this idea. At the pool, they threw a watermelon in the water that was Vaseline. Like you're going to ever eat it. You know what I mean? You can never get the Vaseline off of it. But I remember they threw that in the water and they said, you know, a group of kids, you get to dive in. Whoever gets the watermelon out of the water gets it. And I remembered being under that water and thinking I was going to die, that I was getting ready to drown, but I was going to get that watermelon out of there, by God. I mean, that's the insanity. That would never cross my mind until I got deeper and deeper into this book and started seeing how when I took the first drink, I started drinking at 12, and when that drink did for me, oh my God, I just remembered thinking, this is great. I love this feeling. Now, what I understand today is alcohol was the only thing that calmed the beast of self-centeredness in me. See, I had no idea that living in this mind of driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, and self-pity were what drove me. And that booze, man, that was just, that was heaven. And we did a ton of outside issues. It was the 60s and 70s. And, you know, my brother was on the east side finding the bad stuff. I'm in the 3rd grade. You know, it was terrible. I was so young. But being the youngest, you just followed suit. My dad's jumping in and out of hay with 9 million women, you know, and he is just not paying attention, if you know what I mean. And so we had a lot of freedom, a whole lot of freedom. And but what I ended up doing, you know, when you're young and you're drinking, I don't know about you guys, there was plenty of booze in our house, but you could only drink so much booze, and then you were going to get caught stealing the booze, right? So you had to sit in front of the 7-Eleven and wait for creepy guy. And creepy guy, look at, I always love the way the women always go, oh, I hadn't thought about creepy guy for a long time. And you got to wait for creepy guy to pull up and get him to buy you the booze. And I know that the creepy guy is sitting in this room, aren't you? Uh-huh. Yeah. I married him. And but what you got is, you know, you get this guy to buy you the booze, and I can't tell you. I mean, we're 14 years old, but I'm assuming he was probably about 30-ish. And then you have to try to get rid of him. It's like flicking a booger off your finger, man. You just can't. You gotta bob and weave in the woods and on your bicycle, and you're pumping to get down to the place you can drink the Boone's Farm but that to me booze was so much fun. It was fun for a long time for me. I couldn't live at home. I couldn't live under the rules that my parents had. The third mother, ended up staying. As a matter of fact, she's been my stepmother since then. I was 10, and my father has passed away since then. But she has certainly been a rock in our family. But I could not live under the rules of our household. They drove me crazy. I've never liked rules. I don't know about you guys, how well you do with them, but I can tell you I don't care for rules. And so I told my dad, he and I constantly fought. And he said, you know, if you can't live by these rules, you're out of here. That's fine. Once again, don't forget the kid you're dealing with, man. I'm out of here. And I mean, I packed my stuff. I called my boyfriend. He came and picked me up, and I moved out, and I never went home. But interesting when you look back was I was going to prove to my father that I could live on my own. I was going to finish high school because back then it was a very interesting time. People were actually dropping out of high school, and I could not wrap my brain around understanding that. I thought, why would you make it this far and quit? I just thought that was such a loser. But what ended up happening my mother died when I was in the 2nd grade. And I don't think before I was in the 2nd grade I was really learning anything anyway. But I remembered not liking school at all. They would talk and I just thought, oh, this is just not my cup of tea. I'd rather be visiting with my friends. And so I lost any sort of interest in education. And what ended up happening is the older I got, I realized, and trust me, I was very well liked in school. I was voted everything you could be voted, most likable. The nerds loved me, the jocks loved me. You know, I ran with the heads, you know what I'm saying? And so everybody loved Katie, so they passed me along for a long, long time. But what ended up happening is I had to cheat, and I'm not talking just look on your paper cheating. I'm talking professional cheater. I'm leaving the window unlocked so I can break back into the school. All you needed was a number 2 pencil. Are you with me on that? Thank God before computers, you could get away with a lot with a number 2 pencil, man. You just broke in. The teacher's, grades were right there. You just erased it, put the correct grade in there. And, the report cards were not computerized. Everything was a pencil. And the older I got, I had to get more and more crafty. And the reason this is so important is because when I'm getting sober, I've got a ton of old ideas, guys. They're driving my life crazy. The insanity behind when the alcohol was removed, I thought I had this deal licked. I thought my problem was booze. Right? Now, don't get me wrong. Booze is a serious problem. I mean, as a matter of fact, if I drink again, it will be the relief because I will have been in the bedevilments. If you drink with time, You're either going to shoot yourself or kill yourself in some fashion or drink, right? I mean, that's what happens to us guys with time. If you've got any time, you've seen it in this program, and it's heartbreaking. And that's that level of pride. So that's the bedevilments that I lived in long before I took that drink. The drink would actually be the relief, right? And so I've got to uncover and discover what it is in Katie that drives me absolutely insane. And so when I share with you these old ideas I have, they follow me all my life. I made my life up. My life is my perspective. It's my delusion. It's the way I see things. I don't see them the way you see them. I only see them the way they affect me. And so what ended up happening is the older I got, I had to get way more crafty at cheating because I had to graduate. I had to get that diploma. And so I'm living there. I'm washing and waxing cars for teachers. I'm mowing yards. I'm doing whatever I can. I was renting a little bitty house for $62.50 a month. It pulled up right by the shrimp boats. They threw their anchor basically in my backyard. It would not be where you'd want your daughter living. Let's just put it that way. And so I convinced my best friend to let me have dinner at her house that night because her mother was the English teacher. And I broke into her briefcase so that I could steal the test, so that I could pass the test, right? You want to hear a great story. I'm speaking, a year and a half ago? It never occurred to me that I needed to make an amends to this English teacher. Just didn't occur to me. I loved the story. Everybody laughed. Oh, crafty little girl. I'm sitting in this meeting and I'm getting ready to speak at this conference. And I look out and I go, oh my God, there's Miss Shaw. And Charlie goes, honey, are you okay? And it was like, oh my God, that's the English teacher that I broke into her briefcase. I A,
blows
can't tell
this
the
whole part of the
story,
story, yeah.
and B, I better make an amends before I get out of here, right? She's been sober 26 years, isn't that something? That English teacher. Yeah, it was very, very cool. I mean, they were getting ready to introduce me. I'm like, give me a few minutes, man. So I go over there. I said, are you Miss Shaw? She's like, well, yes, I am. I thought, well, okay, we need to talk after this meeting. But this was a day in the life of me. I'm a con artist, I'm a liar, and I'm a thief. And I was raised middle America, man. I mean, if my dad, I didn't need to steal. I did it all. Everything to me was a challenge to what Katie could get away with. And as my life just spun out of control, I ended up getting pregnant. I have to tell you today, education for me is not what I need to be okay. There are a lot of people in this program that cheated themselves and robbed themselves out of education, and they need to get an education because they felt they were cheated. Please understand that I'm not saying that's not what you should do. As a matter of fact, I'm always impressed. Me, on the other hand, could care less. I don't really dig education. My husband loves history. We go to the Alamo. The guy's explaining the line in the sand and the cannonball, and I'm over there going. And Charlie's got a tear in his eye. And I'm like, oh my God, when are we going
It's the Alamo, for God's sake.
When are we going to go have a cup of coffee? Please don't take me to another museum. His mother was a first grade teacher for 42 years. She doesn't grasp it. I don't care for education. But for me, it's just not my cup of tea. I've been a successful businesswoman, self-employed, which is what you need to be if you're going to choose not to do school. That's about the only way you're going to make a good living. And I make a darn good living. I was 15th in the world in what I chose to do. I mean, I'm smart. I just don't care for education. And you will see it will come up this weekend, trust me. So when I come into Alcoholics Anonymous at 26 and they hand you a book, I mean, come on, I'm not the only one in here who doesn't comprehend. How many of y'all were like, are you kidding me? A book? Is somebody going to read it to me? I mean, is somebody going to explain it to me? I mean, this is not good news. For the person who doesn't, I mean, I can read, don't get me wrong, I can read, I can't spell very well, but I can read, I just can't comprehend. I can read 3 pages, and then if you tell me what I just read, I got nothing. I mean, I read murder mysteries, and I'm still, why they can't keep up with 4 names. I mean, let's just do 4 people's names. You're bringing in another character, I can't handle it. But and I always joke that my kids are going to find all my writings, and I put in here, I write a lot of notes, and I wrote the word obsession. UPSESSION. Obsession. Charlie goes, Katie, we can fix it. I said, don't touch it. Kind of proud of that, honey.
We can turn it into
We can make it all work. But what ended up happening, guys, and I got about 5 minutes left, is that I came into Alcoholics Anonymous desperately needing this program. I had a 5-year-old. That poor child had been drugged through the mud. She had no business being anywhere that I took her. My life went downhill. My life went downhill very, very fast. I'll tell you what, for you guys that have kids, drinking and children do not go together well at all. They like to get up early. That's a problem. They like to eat regularly. That's another problem. They need to go to bed and get plenty of sleep, and they cost a lot of money at the babysitter. All these are problems. But by golly, I was going to do it. And when she was 3, she really should have been taken from me. And she's 32 years old. We have an incredible relationship today. I've been sober since she was 5. We've certainly had our ups and downs. She has our first grandson, who's 4. And unfortunately, she relived a lot of her childhood when he turned 3 and 4. And she got very resentful at me. And it was just 6 months ago. We had a tough run. And we sat down. Thank goodness this program has allowed us to sit down. And it's allowed me to sit there and listen to her tell me how painful it was for her to be, left unattended with no food and blah, 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 blah. And for me to sit there with no guilt, no shame. You know what I mean? I do not have guilt and shame. I'm telling you, it's wonderful to be that free. I am so sorry she's experiencing that pain. But I got to tell you, the freedom that we can have, the 9th step promise me amazing promises. They all do. I love the 10th step promises. But they give me these things where this is my daughter's natural ebb and flow. She had a child, and she saw what it requires to be a mother, and I didn't have those skills. Alcoholism will cut everything in your life away. And so what ended up happening is I get sober. Joe, my husband, he's got 6 years more than me. He gets very, very sick and has a brain tumor, and it's terrible. I'll tell that story when we're talking more about the 3rd step. But, well, you know what? I better tell it now because I may forget it, and it's a crucial story. He was a very sick man. We couldn't figure out what it was. A girlfriend of mine, we didn't have good insurance, and a girlfriend of mine says, you can drive a school bus, and you'll get instant medical insurance. Now, remember, I will spin the plates, man. I'll bring home the bacon. I'll fry it up in the pan. What do we need to do? I'm the go-getter, right? And so I go to drive a school bus. Can you imagine that? Let's just take a moment to think about that, okay? I have got a whole career going, right? I am a mass producer in my business, and I'm driving a school bus with a wooden stick where you got to beat the wheels, and you want to beat the kids with it 90% of the time. But I mean, I'm going to do this bus for a window of opportunity. I'm just going to do this bus for a small period of time until my husband gets his head checked. Well, we go into the emergency room, and the doctor does the CAT scan, and he comes back in. I'll never forget. He puts his hand here and goes, my God, he's got a massive tumor in his head. It's huge. It's the size of a grapefruit. And I remembered my first thought was, oh, my God, I am going to be driving this school bus forever. That was my first thought. Because that's how self-centered I am. That is how awake I am to the level of self-centeredness that I'm at. Now, I didn't say anything, and I didn't act on it. But do you know, my husband being that sick, man, I was going to be driving that school bus. That school bus was supposed to be a wink of an eye. Just long enough for me to get this medical insurance, figure out how Katie can manage. Because I got to get in there. I got to spin plates, man. I got to get everybody. I got to hold this family together. And I thought, oh, my God. Well, I drove that school bus for 3 years. And unfortunately, my husband ended up dying, but he did not die of the brain tumor. The brain tumor ended up being benign. He was never going to work again. He had massive brain damage, but he was still a great guy. I mean, if you had lunch with him, you could tell he had brain damage. But if he was just sitting here, you wouldn't know. He didn't slobber. He didn't lose any body functions, anything like that. But he was in untreated alcoholism, just like I was. And he convinced those doctors to give him anything he wanted, which is what we do, right? Because the pain was so great and it was overwhelming and he couldn't live with what he had. And he ended up dying of a heroin overdose. And that was 6 years into him, having the brain tumor. That's what I'm talking about. So when I talk about untreated alcoholism and I talk about being a part of sick AA, I get very passionate behind it because not all of us get out the other side. And not we don't. And what ends up happening, I think, is sometimes you can be in untreated alcoholism and you say, well, I'm not going to drink. I mean, I'm not, I don't know where my big book is. And I mean, I don't really use my sponsor. And I mean, I read daily reflections briefly in the morning. And I mean, I don't sponsor, but I'm not going to drink. And the truth is what you're going to have is you're going to have a root canal because you're getting older and your teeth are getting older. And when you get that root canal, the doctor says, are you going to need some Vicodin? Well, by golly, I am going to need some Vicodin. And you know what? I do need some Vicodin. And that Vicodin triggers the allergy. Because when I'm spiritually fit, God makes that Vicodin medicine if necessary. But when I'm not, it triggers that allergy because I'm in the malady and I don't even know it. And that's exactly what happened to my husband. He was a solid member of Alcoholics Anonymous. But we had nothing but meetings, which was what I thought was fine. I really, really don't, please don't ever hear Charlie and I say there's anything wrong with meetings. We love the fellowship. We love AA. We love AA meetings. But that's all we had. That will not keep me from drinking, period. Now, it'll last a long time. I'm here to tell you it lasted 10 years. But it'll eventually, God's grace will run out. And it's like a light switch. Could be a motorcycle wreck. It could be wrench your knee and you got to go under surgery for a bad knee. It could be a surgery that's simple, not life-threatening, and it triggers the allergy. And the next thing you know, you're scheduling more dental work or something, and then you're drinking. And we see a ton of people. So when we start tomorrow, Charlie will do the first step, and first and second, I'll do the third, and then we'll just rock on through the weekend. And thanks so much for letting me share my story.